the book of 1 Samuel. And even though it says chapter 5, I'm going to be reading chapter 4. 11 verses of chapter 4. The word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines and encamped beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped in Ephek. Then the Philistines put themselves in battle array against Israel. And when they joined battle, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men of the army in the field. When the people had come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hand of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh, that they might bring from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted so loudly that the earth shook. Now when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, "What does the sound of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. So the Philistines were afraid. They said, "God has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us! For such a thing has never happened before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Be strong, conduct yourselves like men, you Philistines, that you do not become servants of the Hebrews as they have been to you. Conduct yourselves like men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated. Every man fled to his tent. There was a very great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Also the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Remember Steven Spielberg's movie Raiders of the Lost Ark? It was the first of 4 Indiana Jones films. It was released, I can hardly believe this, in June of 1981. That was just a few months before I came here first time as pastor. I was 30 years old, almost 31, when it came out. And I loved it. Harrison Ford, who of course stars as Indiana Jones, was only 38 years old. Well, it has been announced just recently that there is a 5th Indiana Jones movie coming out this next summer. Harrison Ford will again star in it. He will be 77 years old when it is released. Now, I don't know how he's going to do all the stunts that are necessary in an action film. Now, they haven't decided a name for the film yet, but since he's aging, I'm suggesting maybe Raiders of the Lost Hearing Aids. I can say that because I wear hearing aids now, which I never had before. Seriously, I loved Raiders of the Lost Ark. Before that film, a lot of people didn't even know what the Ark of the Covenant was. And the film was pretty accurate in the way that it depicted the Ark, even to the theory of what happened to the Ark. Now, the real Ark went missing, of course, and no one really knows what happened to it. One of the theories is that it was taken from Jerusalem to Tanis, Egypt, by Pharaoh Shishak. 1 Kings 14:26 says this, that he, that's Pharaoh, took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. Well, if he took away everything, that means he took away the ark. So the filmmakers, did the research, and they realized that this was a possibility, and that's what they based the whole film on. Although I think we can say with certainty that the ending of that film is not accurate. That the Ark of the Covenant is not in a crate in a warehouse somewhere in Washington, D.C. Ark of the Covenant, in case you don't know, was a sacred box that God commanded Moses to make on Mount Sinai. The book of Exodus gives detailed instructions on how the ark is to be constructed. It was to be 2.5 cubits by 1.5 by 1.5, which translates to about 4.5 feet by 2.5 by 2.5. It's made of wood, but it was covered completely in gold. On the lid of the box were 2 cherubim, which were heavenly creatures with their wings stretched out. Inside of the box, according to the New Testament letter to the Hebrews, it says there was the 10 Commandments, the tablets of the law, as well as a jar holding the manna, the bread that fed the Hebrews in the wilderness, and Aaron's rod that budded, that verified that he and his line would be the priests. The ark was the holiest object in ancient Hebrew religion. It was placed in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle, which was the portable tent of worship, and then later in the permanent temple in Jerusalem. The ark was considered the throne of God. The invisible God was said to dwell above the mercy seat, which was the lid of the box, between the cherubim. And it was so sacred that only the high priest could touch it. In fact, there's a scene in the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel where King David, who had decided that he wants to build a temple for God. He doesn't get to do that, but he wants to build a temple for God. He wants to make Jerusalem the center of worship. So he has the ark brought from Kiriath Jearim to Jerusalem. And they brought it on a cart, which was foolish because you weren't supposed to bring it on a cart. And they told you how I was supposed to do it. Supposed to do it with the holding the poles and have the Levites carry it. But they brought it on a cart pulled by oxen. And on the way, the roads, of course, were not real good. And on the way, the cart began to tilt and to stumble, and it looked like the ark was going to fall off. So one of the oxen drivers, Uzzah his name was, put out his hand to steady the ark. He was being a good guy, didn't want the ark to fall over onto the ground and open up. But he was struck dead, it says, for trying to do that, because he was supposed to touch the ark. Our Old Testament reading for today describes a time when the Philistines captured the ark. Now, I'm sure that they were curious about what happened, what was inside of the ark. It doesn't say explicitly that they opened up the ark, but if you get a golden box to capture from your enemies, you open up the box probably. In any case, it says that 70 of them died as a result. That's where the Raiders of the Lost Ark got the idea for that scene, if you remember, where the Nazis open up the ark and the angels of death come out and they kill all the Nazis in gruesome ways. The Ark of the Covenant embodied God, or represented God, or symbolized God, whatever word you want to use. Where the ark was, God was. The ancient Hebrews really thought that God dwelled in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle, and later in the temple in Jerusalem, the house of God. And the ark was his throne in that house. Now, in our Old Testament story, the Hebrews went out to fight against the Philistines, and the Israelites were defeated. So they came up with a brilliant idea of taking the ark into battle with them so God would fight for them. They assumed that God would not let the Philistines capture the ark. Well, they were wrong. They thought they were trying to manipulate God into doing what they wanted, which was victory. The Hebrews would make this mistake over and over again. Later, they would assume that God would never allow Jerusalem to be captured, never allow the temple to be destroyed because it was the house of God. But prophets like the prophet Jeremiah tried to warn them that that wasn't true, but they would not listen. Even Jesus, in his day, tried to warn them, but they would not listen to him either. The sin of the Israelites in the Old Testament and New Testament was they tried to limit God, tried to manipulate God. They tried to contain God to this box that they had made. They should have known better. In the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles, Solomon builds a temple for God in Jerusalem. David was not allowed to build a temple because he was a man of war, but Solomon was allowed to because he was a man of peace. So he built this temple in Jerusalem. So God would no longer have to dwell in a tent, he says, but dwell in a nice house made of cedar and made of stone. But even Solomon knew that God could not be confined to the building that he was making, much less this little box. In the prayer that Solomon offered at the dedication of the temple, he said, "But will God indeed dwell with man on earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built?" The Apostle Paul, in our New Testament reading for today, was speaking to the distinguished philosophers on Mars Hill in Athens. And in preaching to them, he said that God, who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man. Ancient Hebrews and Christians knew God could not be contained to a box, and yet they continued to make that mistake. I contend that today we make the same type of mistake, that we think that we can put God in a box. And I'm going to explore this morning some of those boxes in the rest of this message. One box is quite physical, just like the ark in the temple. We think God can be contained in holy buildings. We think this building here is somehow more sacred than other buildings because we call it church. And therefore, to harm it would be to desecrate it because it is the house of God. Same thing is true of synagogues or mosques or temples. People see the desecration of the sacred building as somehow worse than harming an ordinary building. But God does not live in a building. As both Solomon and Paul said. That is why so many people these days say they do not have to come to a church building in order to worship God. That they can worship God just as well, they say, maybe even better, outside in God's natural cathedral, in the woods, or hiking a mountain. They are right to a certain extent. It is people that make a place sacred, not buildings. Not what we do inside of a building that makes us Christians, but how we live when we go outside of this building. Let's take this one step further. People think that their particular religion, and only their religion, contains God. So people put God in a religious box. Some say their particular sect of their religion has got it right. Now, it used to be that denominations would argue, and centuries ago they would fight with each other. Christian denominations would fight with each other, war with each other over who was right. Who had the true religion. Catholics against Eastern Orthodox, and Protestants against Catholics, and Protestants would fight with each other. You know, the Anglicans would persecute the Baptists, so the Baptists had to leave England, and they had to come to America for religious freedom, and people always argued, Presbyterians against the Methodists, against the Congregationalists, against the Pentecostals. When you go back in every denomination, you get to a point where they thought that they were right, and everyone else was wrong. They put God in their denominational box. Now, there's a very old joke that you've heard of many times, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Well, the man who died and arrived at the gates of heaven, and St. Peter asked, "Which religion?" The man said, "Methodist." He looks at his chart and said, "Go down to room 24, but be very quiet as you go past room 8. Next man arrives, says, "Religion, Presbyterian." Go to room 18, but be very quiet as you go past room 8. Third man comes, "Religion, Episcopalian." Very good. You can go down to room 11, but be very quiet when you go past room 8. The man says, "I can understand why you might have different areas for different religions, but why must we be quiet when we go past room 8? And St. Peter says, "Well, the Baptists are in room 8. They think they're the only ones up here." The Baptists, I can see that. You see. It's pretty true even today. We might be open-minded enough to open the circle maybe a little bit wider, you know, to include Baptists and Methodists, maybe even Catholics. But many people have a line that they will not cross. not Mormons, they aren't getting in, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, Hindus. We may have opened the lid of our religious boxes a little bit, but not too much. Can't let those Scientologists in anyway. We make religious boxes in which we seek to contain the love and the grace of God. But we have a very difficult time thinking outside of the box, outside of our religious box. So we have a building box and a religious box. I want to get on to a theological box, which is related to the religious. Well, we live in a post-denominational age now. Denominations do not mean as much as they used to people. There was a time not too long ago when you didn't marry a person of a different denomination, much less a different religion. You had to convert in order to marry. And this is still true in traditional cultures. But in most of America, at least in most Protestant circles, we've gotten beyond that. But now theology is the big divider. People may not divide up over whether they're Baptist or whether they're Methodist or Episcopalian or Congregationalist. But after all this, we are a community church here in Sandwich, where all denominations are welcome. People do not divide up over whether they are of a denominational background, but they do divide up theologically over whether they're conservative or liberal. And now it's liberals against the conservatives. Denominations are continuing to split over it. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was the fundamentalists against the modernists. Today, it's the evangelicals versus the progressives. You can use different labels if you want to for these two groups. But what it boils down to is those who consider themselves as holding to a historic, orthodox Christian doctrine, and those who see themselves as embracing the spirit of Jesus and rejecting human creeds and traditions, but being faithful to the spirit of Christ. One side puts God in a box of creeds and catechisms and doctrinal statements. You have to check all the boxes and believe every one of these in order to be a Christian. The other person puts God in a somewhat bigger box that holds a wider diversity of beliefs, but you still have to hold to certain liberal ideals of tolerance and especially speech, what you say. Say the wrong thing publicly and you're in big trouble. Either way, we're putting God in a box. Maybe it's kind of bigger theological box with nicer sounding words, but it's still God in a box. The next box is the ethical box. This has been around ever since the Pharisees, and I'm sure before that. This box is more about behavior than it is belief. It's often but not always also labeled conservative and liberal. It is the battleground for social and moral issues, the ones that get our society, arguing with each other. Issues like abortion and homosexuality and capital punishment and gender and race and a lot of other issues. And people who use code language to vilify their opponents and justify their own stance. So instead of pro-life, it is anti-choice. Instead of pro-choice, it is pro-abortion. Marriage equality, or traditional family values. You can go through every issue. You can come up with labels like that. You can tell what side people are on by the language they use. Their language makes it clear who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. No matter which side of the issue you are on, there's always self-righteousness. We are always the good guys. Those other people are the bad guys. God's on our side. And the fate of the Western civilization rests in the balance. And we'll add to this a fifth box, the political box. Republicans versus Democrats. Liberals versus conservatives. In this divide, conservatives are more likely to play the God card, it seems. God is on the side of our country and our flag. But not always. There's a long tradition of the social gospel in mainline Protestantism that places God on the side of the prophets, of of social and economic justice and care for the poor. Whether we are political liberals or conservatives, if we also identify ourselves as Christians, then we can back up our side with all sorts of theological arguments and biblical references. If we are Christian and political, chances are we think that God is on our side, or at least we are on God's side. Now, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a good example of this. Often when people will talk about this, this issue, God gets put into an ethnic box, if you will, whereas assumed by many people that God is automatically on the side of Israel because the Jews are God's chosen people, right? Therefore, if you oppose Israel, you are opposing God. But in the Bible, the prophets of God opposed Israel and the rulers of Israel all the time. And they were imprisoned for doing that. And they were killed for doing that. Jesus talked about this. Jesus wept over Jerusalem, saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." That, by the way, is on those Father's Day, is one of those feminine images for God in Christ, where he talks about himself as a mother hen gathering the chicks. This modern Israel issue gets then all mixed up with Jewish versus Muslim and Christian versus Muslim. It's a real mess. Let me give you another example of God in politics. There's another new movie coming out. This one's coming out in the fall. And it's called The Trump Prophecy. It's being produced by Real Work Studios in cooperation with Liberty University. It argues that Trump's presidency was divinely foretold. The idea behind it is that Trump is a prophesied figure, much like the Persian king Cyrus, who in the book of Isaiah in the Bible is called the Anointed One. He's called the Messiah. Now, this is rather blatantly claiming that God is on your political side, but we have to remember that liberals have committed the same sin. They will use very messianic language when talking about Barack Obama a few years ago. You might remember 5 years ago in 2013, Newsweek had a cover story about Barack Obama that generated controversy. The cover had a photo of President Obama with large letters that read, "The Second Coming," obviously likening the president to the second coming of Christ. Now, this is Newsweek. This is not a conservative evangelical seminary or university doing this. So liberals and conservatives both play this game. Either way, we are co-opting God for our side against the other side. We put God in a political box. In this society that we live in, where so many people tend to put God in a box, a religious box, a theological box, an ethical box, a political box, what are we to do? I say we open up the box. In Greek mythology, there's a story of Pandora's box. Pandora was the first woman. She's an Eve type of figure in Greek mythology. And Pandora opened a box that had been given to Prometheus' brother by the supreme god Zeus. Now, no one's supposed to open this box. Now, Pandora, like Eve, was curious. Just like Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge, in the Bible, Pandora opened the box, and just like when Eve ate the fruit, all these bad things happened. These curses came upon humankind. Same thing happened when Pandora opened the box. All these plagues started coming out of the box. She tried to close the box as quickly as she could, but she wasn't able to close it in time. Almost everything got out. Only one thing didn't, the myth says. One thing remained in the box, and that was hope. The modern idiom to open a Pandora's box is kind of like opening a can of worms. You open the box, you don't know what's going to come out. That's what happened in the Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you remember, the Nazis opened up the box, the Ark of the Covenant, thinking they were going to harness the power of God for the Third Reich. But instead, an angel of death came out and destroyed them. Now, we have to admit that we cannot contain God. That God is bigger than us, bigger than our religions, bigger than our theologies, bigger than our churches, bigger than our ideologies, bigger than our moral systems, our ethical rules. God is so much bigger than our nations and our political parties. The danger is that if we let God out of our boxes, we don't know what's going to happen. What will happen to our church? What will happen to our religion? What will happen to Christianity if we let God out of the Christian box? It's kind of scary. Truth is, God is already out of the box. Never really in the box to start with, as both Solomon and Paul said. We cannot confine God to human constructs or understand God with these puny human brains that we have. We need to stop trying to use God for our purposes and let God use us for God's purposes. God cannot be kept in a box any more than Christ could be kept in a tomb. Let's acknowledge that reality and get on with the task of proclaiming an uncontained and uncontrolled God of unconditional love to a world that worships man-made gods and mistakes them for truth. Let us open our hearts and minds and souls to the love of God which we have experienced in Jesus Christ. Amen. Let us now close our service.